All right, this morning we continue with week number 6 in our Bible study. I haven't really told you this, but if you've watched this online, Wayne does a great job putting these up during the course of the week. We have entitled this Bible study series Prologue. And again, this is a verse-by-verse study of the book of Genesis. This morning we're going to pick back up where we concluded last Sunday morning. We are at day number 5 of the Genesis account of creation, and day number 5. So let's go to Genesis chapter 1 and beginning in verse 15. Again, Genesis chapter 1 beginning in verse 15. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens. Again, and let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens. Now, here's something that I find significant that maybe others might simply glance over. Very clearly, what does God say the purpose is here in verse 15? What does he say the purpose of these lights as he describes them in the expanse of the heavens? What is the purpose that he declares in verse 15? Do you see that? There you go. To give light on the earth. Isn't that interesting? To give light on the earth. What about Mars? What about Jupiter? Does the sun not give light to other planetary vessels? Class, God's not as concerned about the sun, the moon, and the stars as he is with earth. The earth, as I concluded last Sunday morning's lesson, is so tiny in comparison to the sun. Remember, if we said last Sunday morning, if you were to hollow out the sun, how many earths would fit within the sun? Do you remember what I told you? 1.3 million. Let that sink in again just for a moment. 1.3 million of our earth would fit in a hollowed out sun. Don't ask me how they came up with that figure. Yet God is not concerned about the sun in the sense of what he will do in redemption. Although the earth revolves around the sun, in the grand scheme of redemption, the sun revolves around the earth. The earth is the most critical part of this process. You might say the earth is ground zero, because this is where God is going to send his Son, S-O-N, right? The end of verse 15, what does it say? And it was so. I think I said this last week, but I hope that somebody in this class or somebody watches online, by the end of this class, someone will name their next child, It Was So. I don't know how well that goes with your last name, but if it fits, then let me know. Verse 16, God made the 2 great lights. The word great here, translated, is from the Hebrew word for huge. The greater light refers to what, class? The sun. That's right. The greater light refers to the sun. And what does it say? To govern the day. That's a figurative statement, right? Indicating the sway and the influence that the sun will have upon life here on this earth. And what does it say? And the lesser light to do what? To govern or rule the night. And of course, that lesser light is referring to what? The moon. All right, so let's do our figuring here. The moon is smaller than the sun, and the moon is smaller than the earth. And then, class, what almost seems like a throwaway line, but I promise you it's not. What does it say? He made the stars also. Isn't that amazing? He made the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. And oh, by the way, and he made the stars. Do you know why that's interesting? It's funny because the sun, our sun, is actually only considered by most scientists to be an average size star. In fact, there are some estimates that tell us, some scientists say that some of the stars that we see in the sky are 100 times bigger than our sun. Do you know that? But yet they don't seem bigger, do they? You know why they seem so small? Because they're so far away. Yeah. Because they're further away, right? And stars, class, I hate to tell you this, they're really not stationary. You know that? Stars aren't stationary, they actually move. And yet, again, they're so far away that they appear to us to be stationary. And so much so that, I mean, you think about sailors for thousands of years, I guess. They've used the stars to help chart their navigational courses, right? All right, verse 17 and most of verse 18. I'm not going to spend any real time on 17 and 18 because they're actually just emphasizing what we've already said back in verse 14. The purpose of these great lights and lesser lights. And God saw at the end of verse 18 what? It was good. Did he need a redo? Did God do this perfectly? Yeah. And then we read the now familiar refrain, verse 19, what? There was evening, and there was morning, and what day? Fourth day. With day 4 concluded, now we turn our attention to day number 5. That's where we're going to spend the majority of our time together. Beginning in verses 20 and following. It's on this 5th day of creation that God will create what we will call this morning conscious reproductive life. Yes.
Just to clarify, in verse 14, it's describing what God did. It's just showing what God did.
Re-emphasizing what God has already done, correct?
16 is just describing in further detail.
Yep. You got, and God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser lesser light to rule the night. And then, as I said, verse 17, and God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, to separate the light from the darkness. See, it's just kind of a re-emphasizing of what has already been said. Not a problem. It's on this 5th day of creation that we are going to see a significant shift in God's creation. Look at verse 20. What does it say? Then God said, let the waters teem or swarm, depends on your translation. The New American Standard says, let the waters, I think it's swarm. Let me look. Team and swarm. It depends on your translation. Says abound. That's the New King James, right? I just find it interesting. The New American Standard says, let the waters teem with swarms of living creatures. Maybe the ESV says, let the waters swarm with swarms. Is that correct? Yes. So, first of all, that word then, we've said this a million times already. Then meaning what? Immediately. Next up on, it reminds me of Kurt Gowdy. I think that was his name. On Price is Right. You remember the announcer guy? Come on down. You're the next contestant on The Price is Right. So this is, what's that? Rod Roddy. Thank you. You must have watched a lot of Price is Right. What's that? Kurt Gowdy was sports. That's right. He was a sports announcer. That's right. Then God said, let the waters teem or swarm with swarms of living creatures. Now, either way, that's some interesting wording here. Class, this wording here speaks of the fact that this, which has just been created in verse 20, can do what on its own? It can move on its own. That's different than the plants we saw, different from the previous parts of creation. Now we have conscious creatures that can move of their own accord. Now again, if you have the ESV, you'll notice a little bit different wording. It says, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures. Let me ask you a question. Any English majors in this room? Please raise your hand. Not a single English major in our church? Okay. Do you know what a polypton is? A polypton? Polypton. Polypton. See, I didn't know either. I had to look it up. This, what we see here, this swarm with swarms, is called a polypton. It is a literary, rhetorical device where you take the same word and you use it in a sentence twice in a various meaning. And that's really what we have going on here. The seas are going to swarm with swarms of living creatures. In other words, the sea is going to be filled with these moving, conscious creatures. Yes, living creatures. That is correct. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, didn't put it there to evolve. He ready to swarm. That's right. Ready to swarm, and as we're going to see in just a moment, ready to reproduce. And again, that's a dramatic shift here. Something's happening here, and as I've just said, we have these creatures now that can freely move about on their own. But even more importantly, class, for the first time, we have living creatures with this conscious kind of life that instinctively built, created into them is this ability to know how to survive. Like, for instance, birds. You ever been driving down the road, Mike, and a bird like flies toward your car and you tense up? Oh, you just run them over. I tense up. And isn't it amazing how that bird can get so close and then do what? Sometimes they run out of time. Yeah. That's like, I never forget as a kid, I was standing in front of we had a glass screen door at my house, and had glass in the top, screen on the bottom. You may have seen these kind of doors. And I'm standing there one day and just looking outside, and all of a sudden, boom, a bird flew right into the glass and killed itself. And I'm like, ah, it scared me. So every once in a while they mess up. But the idea here is these living creatures within this sea, they have the ability to now consciously know how to protect themselves and how to navigate and put themselves in the right places for the right circumstances. And I love that because that's exactly what the psalmist in Psalm 104 referred to when he said, "O Lord, how manifold are your works in wisdom. You have made them. All the earth is full of your creatures. Here is the sea great and wide with teams," there's that word again, "swarms with creatures innumerable, living things both great and small." So let's continue in verse 20. So we talked about the sea, right? Swarms of living creatures in the water. Then it says, "And let birds fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens." Now, if you go back in what we've taught so far, we've seen how God separated the expanse, right? And created the heavens, and we've talked about those various layers of heaven, and now this open expanse of the heavens is above us, and these birds have been created to fly above the earth in the open expanse of the heavens. Some of those birds fly much higher than others, correct? Some birds don't fly very extremely high. Some, like some of the eagles I've seen just up there, just in those currents, right? And they just soar without any effort. It's beautiful. Now, I want to take a moment to clear up something that a lot of Bible skeptics, atheists try to point out. They'll say, hey, this is a big discrepancy right here. The Bible makes a mistake here. Take your Bible. I need a volunteer to read Genesis chapter 2 and verse 19. Genesis chapter 2, verse 19. Somebody read that for us. You're going to have to read it loud and proud so that everybody can hear you. Genesis chapter 2.
Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the beasts of the field and all the birds of the air.
All right. What does it say? "And out of the ground the Lord God formed every animal of the field and every bird of the sky." Skeptics hear that, and then they read Genesis chapter 1, verse 20, 21, 22, and they say, well, that teaches that the birds were formed out of the water. Because you go back and you read what? Genesis chapter 1, 20, 21, 22, they say, well, that says that the birds were formed out of the water. No. Genesis 2:19 teaches that birds were formed out of the ground. Genesis 1, 20 through 22 does not teach that birds were formed from the waters. Now, keep in mind, nowhere does Genesis 1:20 teach that the waters were the cause of the fish. They were not the cause of the fish. They were the element of the fish. They were where the fish would reside. Not that the waters themselves, or God created them from the waters. They were not the cause of creation for the fish. They were the element. So just as air is the element of the what? Of the birds. I know that sounds crazy, but there are people that if you look this up online, they'll say, oh, Bible, big time. It didn't even get through the first chapter and it's already messed up.
Could you say that, in other words, that the water is the domain of the fish?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Just like the air is the domain of the birds. I have no problem with that at all. But it's just a complete misreading of Genesis 1:20 for someone to claim that it says that, the birds were created out of the water. Any questions on that before we move on to 21? God created, the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed according to their kind. There's a lot to unpack here. But let me start out with a bit of a reality check. Did y'all get any rain at your place last night? A little bit? I think we have a little bit out here at the church building from watching the camera. If we were to go out here and find a little ditch along the side of the property, and we were to scoop up one drop of water from that ditch, we'll just call it ditch water, okay? If we were to scoop up one single drop of water from a ditch along this property, do you realize that that one drop of water can hold up to 500 million microscopic organisms? One drop of water can hold up to 500 million microscopic creatures. And you imagine if you're one of those microscopic creatures, a spoonful of water to them would seem like what? The entire ocean. To me, that's staggering to consider. And I tell you this because you realize, class, for every creature that we can see and know and interact, for every creature that we can see and know and interact with in any given way, there's a much larger part of our creation that we don't even know about yet. So God has created things that are so small that our eyes naturally cannot behold them, and things so large that if our eyes behold them, we stand in awe, correct? But let's look at the section of the verse that I know everybody's itching to talk about. Again, the writer says, and God created the what? The great sea creatures. All right, sea monsters, and we'll talk about that in a moment. This comes from a Hebrew word called tanin. T-A-N-N-I-N, tanin. And in the Old Testament, we see this Hebrew word tanin translated 4 ways. 21 times in the Old Testament, the word tanin is translated as dragon. 3 times it's translated as serpent. 3 times it's translated as well. And 1 time it's translated as sea monster. And if you're looking in your Bible, even the translators struggled to agree on how to use this word right here in Genesis 1. For instance, if you have the King James Version, what does it say? The great whales. The American Standard, the New American Standard says great sea monsters. The ESV and the NLT and the New King James Version says what? Great sea creatures. The key here is this. Verse 21 is referring to some form of creatures that are strange or are of monstrous size. And that really and truly is the root of the definition of the Hebrew word tanin. We're talking about something that is of strange size, something that is of monstrous size. And I'll tell you, I don't know the specific identity or identities of this creature. I cannot help but wonder, why does the writer of Genesis specify these great sea creatures in the creation account? But after you think about it, you'll finally realize the answer is right up under your nose. Didn't evolve, that's exactly right. Jonah and the great fish, we don't know what these great sea creatures are here. I know that sometimes people think there is specifically talking about wells, but when Moses wrote, or he was inspired to write the book of Genesis, I doubt it was wells, because the Israelites would have most likely never encountered a warm-blooded sea, marine animal like a whale at that point. And you've heard the name Leviathan, right? You study the book of Job, Leviathan and Behemoth. Whether it's a Leviathan or a crocodile, I don't think it's a crocodile. Or maybe it's a dragon. It's a Loch Ness monster. The point is, regardless of what it is, listen to me, because I don't want you to miss this. Regardless of the identity of this creature, regardless of its identity, it was created by whom? God. The identity is immaterial. These animals, these creatures that are large, and for some people were frightening, and for other cultures and societies, they even worshiped them, whatever these creatures were. They are not deity. They are not immortal. And let me promise you this, they are no threat to God. These great sea creatures, are part of God's good creation. In other words, as I've heard it said, God may have rebels, but God has no rival.
Human nature that anything that's large or frightening or that we can't understand is awesome.
Yeah.
That's just the word we tack on.
Yep. And it was that way in the Hebrew language. If it was of strange and monstrous size, that word kanim would have been used. Any questions on that? Anybody got any different thought about this great sea creature? I want to hear it. Jerry, let's go.
It was a whale. And we sing about it. Sad, sad, the bitter whale.
So, I hadn't sung that song, Jerry. What's that song?
Sad, sad, the bitter whale.
Was that Naomi?
I don't know. It was a song that we used to sing.
Well, you said bitter whale, like bitter, like B-I-T-T-E-R. Oh, well. Oh, come on, Jerry. Y'all understand what he's saying? Sad, sad, the bitter, W-A-I-L, not W-H-A-L-E.
You like my joke.
You know what? The Price is Right horn would be very apropos right now. I love you, Jerry.
Sometimes.
All the time. Now, seriously, any other questions?
It's saying, Jesus loves me when I'm good, Jesus loves me when I'm bad, but it makes him very sad.
All right, for the first time here, I'm about to jump ahead. So again, God, it says God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed, what? According to their kind. And every winged bird, what? According to its kind. Here's that familiar phrase we've heard so often the first 5 weeks of this study. God saw that it was good. Now, for the first time in the first chapter of the Bible, we will see God give His creation both a command and a blessing. Verse 22, God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." So did you notice what the blessing was? The blessing is that He's enabled that these new creatures immediately begin procreating and multiplying. Now, I thought about this. Do we know how many of each creature were created? It had to be at least enough for it to do what He's commanded them to do, because God's not going to command them to do something that they can't do, right? That's common sense, because they are to fill the what? They're to fill the waters and multiply on the earth. And again, let me make sure you understand this, class. The blessing going on in day 5 of creation represents these creatures' ability to reproduce. Be fruitful and multiply, right? That's a familiar phrase in Genesis. All right, now we shift from day 5 to day 6. We see that same formula. There was evening, there was morning. 5th day, verse 24. Then God said, let the earth produce living creatures according to their kind, livestock and crawling things, and animals on the earth according to their kind. How many fingers am I holding up? 3. Here, class, you have 3 classifications of how God created. The first, livestock, which would refer to animals that are capable of being what? Tamed. Crawling things, referring to what? Insects. And small animals with short legs whose bodies are close to the ground. I know some of your translations say, we'll say beasts of the earth. Is that right?
Yeah, beasts of the earth.
Animals or beasts of the earth, which refers to 4-legged animals that are not easily tamed. That means, by the way, on day 6, God created one of my favorite animals. You know what that animal was? A dog. He created on this day the dog kind. The reason I use the word kind here this morning, class, is because God, there are thousands of types of dogs today. Did you know that? God did not create all the thousands of types of dogs that we have on this day today. As much as I hate to say it, God here did not create Chihuahuas and German Shepherds and Pugs and Dalmatians and all the other dogs that we see today. Instead, please hear me out what I'm about to tell you. God created one or a few types of dogs within this original creation that contain within it all the information within their genes or their DNA to become the different breeds of dogs that we see today. And if you're not following me, let me take it a step or two further. Every animal, both yesterday and today, contains within its body a special code that we call what? DNA. Do you know what that stands for? Deoxyribonucleic acids, okay? Deoxyribonucleic acids. Say that 1,000,000 times until you get it right. Now these deoxyribonucleic acids, these DNA, are what determines what color the animal will be, how tall or how short it will be, how many legs, how many arms it will have, and many other physical characteristics. But in each animal, listen, because this is key, in each animal there is more information than is expressed. Again, there is more information in that DNA than is expressed. What do I mean by that? Okay. That means, anybody here have a dog that's black color? Okay. A black dog might have information within its DNA to be the color red, white, brown, or black. But in this case, only the color black is activated or turned on within that DNA. I have 2 Chihuahuas in my home. Both came from the same parents. And if you have seen them recently, they look nothing alike. One is white and cream, and the other is dark brown. One is tiny, was a runt, and the other is the most athletic chihuahua you're ever going to see in your life. She thinks she's a Great Dane. I don't know. But if you're following me, that's how a black mother dog can have babies that are brown or white or red or spotted. In other words, her DNA can contain within it the code for all those colors. Bilingual. I'm not sure that was in his DNA. What's that? He's a people. Now, I want to be serious with you because I want you to understand this. There's a reason behind this, and I don't want you to lose this. Let's say that we wanted dogs that were always brown. How could we get all brown dogs? The answer is really simple. You take a brown dog and you breed it with another brown dog. Then if those two puppies, or those two dogs have puppies that are black, brown, red, whatever, you simply take only the brown puppies and breed them to brown dogs. And if you do that enough times, I promise you, you will get rid of the DNA code for black, red, or white, and all you will have are brown dogs. But I want you to notice what would happen in the scenario I've just mentioned. You started off with a dog that had the DNA code to give us black, brown, red, white, or other colors, right? We started off with that. And after you kept picking the brown ones, eventually had dogs that lost the code for black, white, red, or any other color. We didn't gain DNA. We didn't gain code. What did we do? We lost it. We actually lost information. You might say, Jonathan, do you really like dogs this much? Is there a point to all this? Well, I'm a dog person, but that's not the reason I'm telling you this. What I'm telling you is important for us, even as believers, to know, because there are people who believe in evolution that will tell you that dogs have evolved from lower life forms over millions of years. Evolutionists claim that all the different breeds of dogs that we see, they claim that that's evidence that dogs can evolve and gain new DNA code. But that has never been the case. In fact, the different breeds of dogs prove the opposite, since new DNA information is never added. Again, you have all these different variety of dogs out there today. Evolution could not have made that happen. Here's why. You have the law of biogenesis that says that all animals come from other animals of their what? We read it right here in Genesis. Come of after their what? After their kind. That means that puppies come from mother dogs. Kittens, I ain't leaving you out. Kittens come from mother cats. Snakes come from mother snakes. Yet an evolutionist would have you to believe that at some point in the past, a non-dog gave birth to a dog. But that can't happen according to their own rules, their own law of biogenesis. You see, we might have a brown mother dog give birth to a black puppy or a white puppy and a brown one, but let me know after class, have you ever had a mother dog give birth to anything other than another puppy? God created within each of these animals that were created on this sixth day of creation, He created them with the DNA code, the DNA structure that would be needed to accomplish all the various types within each kind. And you know, we've already dealt with this, right? We said that God could create man fully mature, correct? Same with woman. Same with the birds of the air. Did He put them in the air and they just dropped to the ground? Or when He created them in the air, what did they do, class? Immediately flew, had the ability to reproduce. The same thing with the fish in the sea. And we said if He could do that on the earth, He could do that where? In the earth. And He could do that within our own DNA code. So that's important to remember, especially when evolutionists are trying to tell our children and our grandchildren otherwise. Be armed, know the truth so that you can share it with other people. All right, thank you all very, very much. We'll continue in verse 25. But I tell you what, we'll conclude here in verse 25. We'll let this stand as it is. Next week, we get to talk about the biggest moment in creation, do we not? The creation of man. All right, thank y'all.